At 35, I thought I was done being compared to my sister. People say men my age are supposed to be less sensitive, better at choosing what to hold on to and what to let go. But my parents decided to prove me wrong with a little birthday surprise for Emily. A Lexus for her, pocket change for me. Yes, you heard that right. A Lexus and loose change. They even put it in a tiny envelope, half the size of my palm, where three shiny quarters rolled out like I was about to use them as a down payment on a house in San Francisco. The party was extravagant. My parents' suburban Denver home glowed with lights, balloons everywhere, tables stacked with cakes, wishiwan, and catered hors d'oeuvres from the fanciest shop in town. Neighbors, friends, and colleagues poured in until the place looked more like a small wedding reception. The highlight of the night came when my father, grinning from ear to ear, held out the keys to a brand new Lexus RX. Not just bare keys either. A giant red bow, big enough to cover a blanket, sparkled under the phone flashes of guests recording every angle. Emily nearly burst into tears of joy, hugging our parents, squealing she couldn't believe it, as if she had just won the lottery. The room erupted in applause. Gasps, cheers, someone even blurted out, "A good daughter deserves a good reward." I stood there with my glass of water, thinking, sure, good must mean living off someone else's money while your brother breaks his back paying tuition with part-time jobs. But you know me, I kept it polite, forced a smile, and raised my glass to the air. Then came my turn. My father turned toward me, same warm smile, but with that cheap philosophical tone he liked to use when pretending to be fair. "You've always been good at saving. Here's your seed money." He shoved an envelope into my hand. I opened it. Three quarters rolled out, clinking on the wooden table. The room went silent for half a second. Then everyone's attention swung back to the gleaming Lexus outside. And me, I just stared at those coins thinking, well, sure, who doesn't build a future on 75 cents? Wall Street should take notes. Maybe I should call Warren Buffett tomorrow, share my secret. Honestly, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Part of me wanted to burst out laughing at how ridiculous it all was. Another part of me felt the kind of pain that claws at your throat. It was like someone cutting the same spot with a dull knife, never deep enough to kill you, but long enough to leave you breathless. This wasn't new. It was just the most elaborate, most public version of the script I'd lived for 35 years. Emily gets the Lexus. I get pocket change and hollow advice. I looked around the room. My parents are beaming at her, guests gushing over her, flashes dancing across Emily's glowing face. Then I looked back down at those three coins, shining under the chandelier. 35 years packed into a single moment, and I realized this wasn't an exception. It was the pattern. The replay of every birthday, every holiday, every gathering since I was 6 years old. 35 years of standing behind Emily. Tonight was just the latest evidence, polished as bright as that Lexus. I let out a dry laugh, not because it was funny, because if I didn't laugh, I might have slammed those coins on the table and screamed in everyone's face. But that's not me. I've grown too used to silence, too used to swallowing it all until the hurt hardens into bone. And friends, I'm not telling you this to complain. I know many of you out there have families just like mine. Maybe you've sat in a crowded room, watching favoritism play out so clearly it almost felt like a joke, while nobody else seemed to notice. So I'll ask you, have you ever witnessed something like this? Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to know if Denver is the only place that manufactures family dramas this bizarre. The party ended, but the laughter clung like taffy stuck to teeth. From my old bedroom on the second floor, I could hear the music thumping, glasses clinking, Emily's high-pitched voice bragging like she was starring in some second-rate reality show. I sat on the edge of the bed, looking around the room that once belonged to me. The shelves still held a few yellowed math books, a deflated basketball from high school, and a crooked award certificate taped to the wall that no one had bothered to take down. In this house, nothing of mine had ever been cherished the way Emily's newest dress was. I pulled an old backpack from the closet and began picking a few things to take with me. My 11th grade science trophy, the only prize I ever got from a fair panel instead of from biased parents. My college graduation photo, where I stood alone in a blue gown because my parents were too busy congratulating Emily on some makeshift summer art camp award. And the sketch of the first bridge I ever designed, paper wrinkled but proof of sweat that was mine alone. I didn't pack much, only the things that still held my dignity. Before leaving the room, I glanced at the mirror. No tears, not a single drop. Just a crooked smile. Maybe the tears had dried long ago, replaced by thick skin and sarcastic jokes forged over 35 years. I went down to the kitchen. The yellow light still burned, the table cluttered with glasses. I set the house key down, cold against my palm, and dropped it on the table. The metallic thud against wood sounded like the period at the end of a long sentence called "The Good Son." Before walking out, I pulled the envelope of coins from my pocket, looked at the shiny quarters one last time. I slipped them into my jeans as if to say, at least these 3 coins will be the most valuable keepsake my parents ever gave me. Proof that I didn't imagine this moment. It was real and it was absurd. At 2 in the morning, I fired up my beat-up Ford Focus. The engine coughed like an asthmatic old man, but it started. I turned the wheel, pulling out of the driveway where Emily's brand new Lexus sat proudly. I muttered, "Happy birthday, little sister. Hope that giant bow keeps you warm all winter." The mountain road was buried in snow, glowing under the moonlight. The old Ford groaned and rattled, but at least it was mine, bought with my own work. Not like that Lexus, built on money and the illusion that the youngest daughter was the center of the universe. The radio came alive with Bing Crosby singing White Christmas. I laughed. He crooned about pure white dreams, while I was driving away from an entire family because no blanket of snow could cover this ugly truth. I switched the radio off, leaving only the howl of wind through the cracked window and the crunch of tires over snow. "White it may be, Bing," I whispered, "but to me it tastes bitter." I gripped the wheel tighter, eyes locked on the faint lines of the road. My chest felt heavy, not anger that flared and burned out, but the kind that had seeped in through 1,000 small scars until I could carry no more. This wasn't a tantrum. This was exhaustion. I wasn't leaving in a fit of rage. I was leaving because I had endured enough. The mountain road was silent, just me and the car. Headlights swept over snow-covered trees, looking like an abandoned Broadway stage. If someone filmed this, they'd call it a liberation scene. In truth, it was cold, weary, and lonely. Memories flickered. Emily's pony party, my store-bought cake, Emily's European art trip, and my midnight shifts at the campus cafeteria. Emily's Lexus, my envelope of coins. If life were Monopoly, she always drew the card that sent her straight to Boardwalk with $200 from the bank. Me, I always landed on go to jail, do not pass go, do not collect $200. The car jolted when the tires slid across black ice. My hands clamped the wheel, heart pounding. And in that instant, I recognized the feeling. My whole life, I'd been skidding along a slick road laid out by my parents, struggling to keep balance, while Emily drove escorted down a wide boulevard. But this time, if I spun out, it was on me. This was my road now. 30 miles out of Denver, the cold bit hard, snow falling thicker. I poured lukewarm coffee from my thermos, swallowed the bitter taste. Bitter, yes, but at least it was real. Not sugar-coated like the sweet words my parents used to cover their favoritism. I flicked on the cabin light, looked at the passenger seat. Empty. Part of me felt relief, free from Emily's shadow at last. Another part felt the sting of solitude. After 35 years, I left my family without a single person stepping to the door. "No, are you all right? Drive safe." Just 3 coins and an empty envelope in my pocket. Yet in that emptiness, I caught a faint spark. If my parents had never chosen me, then at least I could choose myself. If they gave Emily everything, then I'd give myself this one thing. I kept driving, letting the snow pound against the windshield. The wipers screeched like a steady heartbeat. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was mine. And that, my friends, is how I left at 2 in the morning. With an old Ford, a few keepsakes in my backpack, and a pocket that rattled with 3 coins. If someone wrote a proverb for this night, it would be, "Some people start their future with a Lexus contract, others with loose change. But a future is still a future, as long as you drive away from the old script." I arrived in San Francisco on a damp morning. Fog draped over the Golden Gate Bridge like old laundry hanging in a washroom. My battered Ford wheezed like it was on its last breath, but it crawled its way to Miguel's apartment. My old college buddy, now a successful architect. I had called him at 5 in the morning, voice hoarse from stale coffee and a night of runaway driving. He just said, "Come on over. The couch is free." Honestly, that one line felt warmer than 35 years under my parents' roof. Miguel's place was small, but it had the human warmth my parents' house never had. No crystal chandeliers, no oak dining table that could seat 30, just a beat-up sofa stained with coffee, shelves stacked with architectural magazines, and a dining table no bigger than a chessboard. But it was warm, really warm. The smell of freshly ground coffee mixed with the faint tang of paint from sketches on the desk. If my parents' house were a museum of expensive furniture meant to impress, then this was a home. The kind of place where you kicked off your shoes, squatted on the couch, and laughed loudly without someone warning you not to damage imported leather. Miguel handed me a chipped mug and asked, "So what is it this time?" I gave him the short version. "Lexus for Emily, loose change for me." He laughed so hard he nearly spilled his coffee. "Three-quarters? At least they could have written you a $10 check so you could buy breakfast at McDonald's." I laughed too for the first time in months. Because my story was so absurd, it belonged in a bad sitcom. That night planted a thought I'd never dared to entertain. Maybe family wasn't just blood. Maybe family was the one who opened the door at 2 in the morning without asking questions. The one who gave you the old sofa and the chipped mug, but with it said, "Sleep, we'll figure it out tomorrow." If that was true, then maybe I could redefine family on my own terms. The next morning, with pale sunlight seeping through the blinds, I opened my laptop and typed an email requesting a transfer from Denver to the San Francisco office. My fingers trembled on the keys. Part of me feared rejection. Part of me feared acceptance. Because if they said yes, it meant this wasn't a visit anymore. It meant the cut was real. Still, I pressed send, a tiny click that thundered in my chest. Miguel patted my shoulder. "You'll be fine." Every bridge starts as a messy sketch. Coming from an architect, it made perfect sense. A week later, I sat in the office of Dr. Klein, the therapist Miguel recommended. Her office looked like an old library, shelves overflowing with books, chairs upholstered in faded green fabric, desk buried under paper. Not like the polished leather chairs in Hollywood movies, which I liked. At least it didn't make me feel like a stranger paying for someone's time. She peered at me over round glasses, voice gentle, like she was asking about the weather. "Where would you like to start?" I meant to talk about work, stress, and moving. Instead, one word slipped out of my mouth like a cough: favoritism. It echoed through the room, then fell to the floor like a steel marble. I had never dared to say it out loud, even though it had lived in me all my life. She nodded, no surprise, no judgment. Favoritism, from whom, toward whom? I gave a dry laugh. My parents toward my sister. Lexus for her, pocket change for me, wapo. That about sums it up. Saying it out loud sounded even more tragic than keeping it inside. But strangely, it felt lighter, as if I had been hauling a bag of cement without knowing it, and suddenly set it down. Therapy wasn't a scam after all. It was like a storage unit for the weight you can't carry every single day. In the following sessions, I learned to tell my childhood stories without minimizing them. I remembered my 6th birthday when Emily got a pony party in the yard, and I got a supermarket cake. I remembered my graduation night, my parents' chairs empty because they were at Emily's meaningless sports event. I remember the $67,000 student debt I paid off while they funded Emily's art-finding tour of Europe. I told it all, for the first time without excuses. Each time Dr. Klein nodded, sometimes asking, "How did that feel?" I answered with the sarcasm I knew best, like being an uninvited guest in my own family. Except that uninvited guests usually get a free drink. I got 3/4. Miguel remained my anchor outside therapy. At night after work, we shared cheap pizza. He sketched buildings while I doodled bridges. Once I joked, if we teamed up, we could build a skyscraper with a bridge on the roof. My parents would never get their Lexus up there. We laughed so hard we nearly choked on cheese. I realized healing didn't need expensive retreats or meditation trips to India. Sometimes all you needed was a friend who knew exactly when to laugh and a therapist who knew exactly when to stay silent. San Francisco slowly became my place to begin again. I walked its steep streets, pastel houses crowding shoulder to shoulder, and thought, this isn't paradise. But at least it isn't that cold museum my parents called home. Here I had an old sofa, a chipped coffee cup, Tuesday therapy, and a future of my own choosing. And you know what? It all felt far richer than a Lexus with a bow the size of a blanket. The funny thing about leaving home at 2 in the morning is you discover a simple truth. Your phone suddenly becomes a blaring speaker for people who just realized you've disappeared. I never thought I'd hear from my parents so much. In 35 years, I could count their calls on one hand. But in a single night, I got more rings than my entire month's worth of Netflix binges. At first, my mother's voice trembled, sounding worried. Where are you? Do you know what time it is? You're making us so worried. I almost laughed. Mom, for 35 years, I went to school, went to work, fell on my face, and no one ever called to ask if I'd had dinner. But now that I've vanished with 3/4, suddenly I'm the #1 search priority. A few days later, worry turned into blame. A text from Mom, I had to be hospitalized. You stressed me out. My blood pressure spiked. This is your fault. I nearly choked on my coffee. Let me get this straight. 35 years of ignoring me, and now she hands me the bill for her hypertension. Family math, I guess. Lexus plus loose change divided evenly equals me, the cause of heart disease. Then came my father. He skipped the hospital drama and went straight to an action thriller. If you don't come back now, I'll call the police. You're acting like a fugitive. I blinked at the screen. Fugitive. I took 3/4 in a worn-out backpack, not the Federal Reserve. I pictured the Denver cops hearing the report. Excuse me, sir, did you say your son stole 75 cents? Yes. We'll issue a nationwide manhunt right away. Emily, of course, went for sitcom sarcasm. Her text read like it was lifted from a laugh track script. Don't be dramatic. You're acting like this is a movie. I'll give you a ride in the Lexus anytime. I swear to you, I've never wanted to reply with one line more than at that moment. Thanks, but I'm allergic to red bows the size of blankets. Every time the phone buzzed, I asked myself, where were these people when I was working midnight shifts in the college library? Where were they when I gave my graduation speech to empty family seats? Where were they when I was crushed under $67,000 of student loans? Oh, right. At the airport, Emily waved goodbye as Emily left for Europe to find an inspiration. The peak of this circus came when I checked my credit report and found something sweet. My father had co-signed a credit card for Emily using my name. I stared at the screen, nearly spitting coffee all over the keyboard. So love comes in many forms. In my family, the preferred form is signing the older brother's name onto the younger sister's debt. A warm kind of love. If warm means your house catches fire. I took a deep breath and did the only reasonable thing. Froze my credit. One simple click. Accounts locked. Transactions stopped. And I felt like I'd just cut the rusted chains that had been shackling my legs for decades. No yelling, no arguments, just one clean act. I even sent a short email. No exclamation points, no emojis. All financial responsibilities tied to my name end today. I imagined my father reading it, red-faced, grumbling about how ungrateful I was, how family should matter more than anything. But all I heard in my head was one line. Family matters, but my credit matters more. After that, I turned off phone notifications. Each night, missed calls stacked up like a countdown clock in some blockbuster movie. But instead of panic, I felt peace. Silence is golden, especially when it spares you from listening to accusations disguised as family values. Miguel smirked at me. You just set a boundary. How does it feel? I leaned back on the couch, thought for a moment, and said, like taking off a pair of shoes 2 sizes too small after 35 years. The blisters are still there, but at least my toes can breathe. In the days that followed, I buried myself in work and therapy with Dr. Klein. This time, I told her about the credit card stunt. She frowned. How did it feel to be used like that? I laughed, like an ATM. An ATM at least has a PIN code. Funny thing about boundaries, people tell you they block out love. But the truth is, they're just fences to keep the neighbor's dogs from biting you. And trust me, My family's dogs bite a lot. That weekend, I sat in a cafe in the Mission District, looking out at the fog-draped street, and for the first time, I felt my lungs ease. Not because I won a battle, but because I stopped acting in their play. If my family wants to keep filming in their tragedy, they can. I won't play the villain anymore. And friends, if anyone ever tells you that setting boundaries is selfish, remember me. A 35-year-old engineer who left home with 3 quarters and finally found freedom by freezing his credit. If selfish means not letting people wreck your name with debt, then I'll gladly wear the crown of the selfish king. That was my first hard line. No screaming, no fights, just one cold email, one click, and one new truth. This time, I chose myself. My cousin Rachel's wedding took place at a luxury hotel in Portland, 6 months after the night I drove away in that old Ford. The whole family gathered, and as tradition dictated, it wasn't really a wedding. It was a bragging convention. People came to admire the bride's dress, sure, but most of the time was spent measuring who wore designer labels, who drove the newest car, and who got seated at the VIP table. The invitation arrived with the seating chart tucked inside. And yes, as you've guessed, I was honored with a spot between my parents, right across from Emily, a desperate attempt to stage the happy family portrait. I looked at the chart and smirked. Did they really think I'd sit quietly and let them perform their play called We've Never Had Problems in front of the relatives? Sorry, but I've upgraded from background extra to leading role. So I emailed the planners. Short, polite. Please assign me a seat away from my parents. I'm allergic to fake scripts. I didn't use the word allergic, but that was the gist. And you know what? They agreed. Turns out sometimes all you have to do is ask and you get a chair far from the stage. But my family never surrenders that easily. The night before the wedding, they summoned me to the hotel library, a place meant for Shakespeare discussions or history research turned into a family courtroom. My father sat in an armchair like a traveling judge. My mother clutched tissues, dabbing at tears that hadn't yet fallen. Emily stood by the window in a designer dress, ready for her close-up as the concerned sister. I walked in carrying 3 props: a photo album, a stack of financial statements, and a glass jar filled with quarters. Yes, I'd been dropping 1 coin a week into it, a strange but effective kind of therapy. They looked at me like I was walking into a wedding with a bomb. I set everything on the heavy table, sat down, and smiled. Let's begin, my father started. You've shamed us. For 6 months, you cut contact, made your mother sick, and left the family worried. I leaned back, arms crossed. Worried, yet somehow still had time to co-sign Emily's credit card with my name. The air froze. Emily rolled her eyes. My mother coughed. My father slammed the table. That was only temporary. Because you've always managed on your own, I assumed. He stopped, but it was too late. Assumed hung in the air like a fire alarm. I tilted my head, smiled. Assumed? So my life's been an Excel sheet. I'm the cell that auto-calculates. Emily's the one who needs manual input, so she always gets priority. But Dad, self-sufficiency doesn't mean less value. I opened the album. First page, Emily's pony birthday party. 3-tier cake, balloons flooding the yard. Next page, my birthday the year after. A supermarket cake, 2 neighborhood kids. A few more pages. Emily with her suitcase headed to Europe for art inspiration. Me in a cafeteria apron hauling trays. I didn't narrate much. I just let the pictures talk. Then I laid down the statements. Tuition? I paid with loans, $67,000. Right beside Emily's fully funded education, plus her short-term study abroad. I underlined the numbers in red. This is evidence, not emotion. My voice was calm, as if I were presenting at work. Finally, I slid the jar of quarters across the table. Coins clinked inside, glinting under the light. Each one represents a week I've lived free of the family script. 6 months, 26 coins. Not because I enjoy playing piggy bank, but because I needed proof that my worth isn't measured in Lexus keys or pocket change. My mother started sobbing, this time with real tears. We never meant to hurt you, I shrugged. Intent doesn't erase damage. A hammer still shatters glass, even if you didn't mean to throw it. Emily chimed in confused. You're just too sensitive. I never asked for this. I laughed. Thanks. I'll add sensitive to my resume. I'm sure it'll land to me a great job. My father lost patience. What do you want? An apology. Money? A car? I looked him dead in the eye. I want two things. One, family therapy with a professional mediator. Two, respect for the boundaries I set. Otherwise, we're done. Silence swallowed the room. The AC hummed like an audience holding its breath. I knew they wanted to argue, but they were out of line, because this time, I hadn't brought feelings, folks. I had brought evidence. And evidence is harder to swallow than bitter pills. I stood, gathered the album, the statements, the jar. Tomorrow is Rachel's wedding. I'll be there. I'll drink champagne, eat cake, and congratulate her. But I won't sit in a fake family tableau anymore. Therapy or goodbye, that's simple. I walked out, leaving behind three faces. My mother is weeping. My father red with rage. Emily stunned. And in my head, one thought echoed. For the first time in 35 years, I was the one writing the script. If Denver was the stage for family plays where I was never given the lead, then San Francisco was the new stage where I finally held the mic. No one shouted in my ear to sit still so someone else could shine, and trust me, that felt better than any free glass of champagne at a family wedding. Work surprised me too. My boss at the San Francisco office saw me working like a coffee-powered machine and handed me the Mission Creek Bridge retrofit project. A real bridge. Steel, concrete, seismic safety. Not those so-called bridges of emotion my parents bragged about but never built. The local paper even ran a headline. Engineer Harris leads seismic safety retrofit of Key City Bridge. I bought 3 copies, but instead of mailing them home like some desperate plea for recognition, I folded them neatly and tucked them away. A reminder that I don't need a Lexus or my mother's compliments to prove my worth. At night, when I wasn't buried in bridge drawings, I went to a community workshop in the Mission District. The place smelled of pine and sawdust, tools clattering all around. People built chairs and tables, but I, a civil engineer, decided to learn wood carving. Something about fumbling with a tiny chisel after years of calculating seismic loads felt comical. But I needed a symbol, so I carved a stamp that read value. Every time I looked at it, I reminded myself, my worth wasn't measured by the cash my parents stuffed into envelopes. It was measured by what I chose to accept or reject. Miguel became my true companion. He teased, "You're carving that stamp to press on your family's lawsuit." I answered no, to press it on my forehead so I don't forget. We cracked up, eating cheap pizza with warm beer. Sometimes happiness is nothing more than being able to laugh at your own pain with someone right beside you. And then there was Sarah, an environmental engineer with curly hair and a laugh like wind chimes. We met at a meeting on making the bridge retrofit both earthquake-resistant and eco-friendly. I talked about concrete. She talked about greenery and recycled materials. I joked, I built bridges to fight earthquakes. You plant trees to fight us. Put it together and no one will ever be able to cross. She laughed and I knew I was in trouble. We didn't start with candlelit dinners. We started by arguing over the friction coefficients of stone pavers. And believe me, if you can debate with someone and still want to see them the next day, that's a sign. Beyond work and friendship, I found another circle, a support group for adults with toxic families. Just the name sounded like a secret bar for people with invisible scars. We met weekly in a church basement that smelled of weak coffee and cheap donuts. Some had been cut off by parents. Some are exploited by siblings. Some, like me, are forever the shadow in family gatherings. For the first time, I didn't feel odd. A 60-year-old accountant said, "Family doesn't get a free pass into your life. If they don't pay with respect, their ticket expires." I nearly clapped. That slogan belonged on a t-shirt. Each week, I shared a slice of my story, not to whine, but to acknowledge that I'd survived. I told them about the 3 quarters in the envelope. The room burst into laughter. A middle-aged teacher said, "Oh, lucky you. My mom once gave me grocery coupons." We laughed until tears ran. Turns out tragedy, when shared, can morph into comedy. I began collecting small moments of this new life. Breakfast with hot coffee and toast I made myself, instead of rushing into the garage to give up the kitchen for Princess Emily. Afternoons walking through Dolores Park, watching kids laugh, and remembering that I grew up with nothing but scraps from her parties. Evenings in the workshop, listening to chisels tap wood. That was the real sound of building, not fake applause in my parents' Denver living room. After 2 weeks, my value stamp was done. Crooked, the V tilted sideways, but I was as proud as if I'd built a new Golden Gate. I pressed it in ink and stamped a blank page. Smudged, uneven, but clear. Value. I stared at it, smiling. Maybe it wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Just like this life, crooked, messy, but finally mine. The irony was, once I stopped begging my parents to see my worth, others began to notice it. My boss praised the bridge project. Sarah asked me to coffee, not to talk about work, but just as two people. At the support group, everyone listened as if my story carried the weight of a bestseller. And I started to believe. Maybe worth isn't something you beg for. Maybe it's something you carve yourself, out of wood, out of smudged ink, out of sweat poured into concrete. One evening, Miguel looked at me, half joking, half serious. You're different now. 6 months ago, you walked in like a shivering wet cat. Now you're like a wet cat that knows how to turn on the heater. I laughed. Yeah, as long as I don't crawl back into being the family's pet. San Francisco didn't turn me into a superhero, but it gave me something priceless. A second chance. I don't need a Lexus. I don't need balloons and chandeliers. I just need a bridge, a crooked wooden stamp, friends who laugh at the right time, and a woman who can argue concrete with me and still make me smile. And you know what? Compared to an envelope of pocket change, I think I've traded the family script for real music. And this time I'm the one holding the mic. A year after that 2 a.m. night, I left Denver with 3/4 in my pocket. I sat in my new San Francisco apartment, watching the small room glow under Christmas lights strung across the window. No 10-foot tree scraping the ceiling like at my parents' house. Just a tiny one from the corner market, hung with mismatched ornaments and a few wooden carvings I made myself. But it was warm, and it was mine. If you asked me to choose between a Lexus with a bow the size of a blanket or this crooked tree in a rented apartment, I'd pick the apartment. The Lexus might turn heads, but it could never give me the laughter echoing out of this cramped little kitchen. My friends filled the place. Miguel lounged on the sofa with a glass of wine, roaring as he retold the story of an intern who forgot to save files and cost his firm a week's work. Sarah stood in the kitchen, showing me how to carve the turkey without turning it into a seismic disaster. I joked, I can build a bridge to withstand a 7.0 earthquake, but carving turkey has me shaking like it's an 8.0. The table erupted, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't the shadow in the corner. I was part of the joy. On the shelf, my jar of quarters sparkled, now full. 1 year, 52 weeks, 52 coins. Each one is a reminder. I lived another week without carrying my family's weight. Someone else might call it silly, but to me it was a personal medal. Emily got a Lexus. I got 52 quarters. The Lexus was scratched after 3 months. My coins only shone brighter. Who really won? I'll let you decide. As I fumbled with the turkey, my phone buzzed. FaceTime. Emily. My first instinct was to hit decline, but Sarah nodded softly. Answer it. You don't have to be afraid anymore. She was right. I picked up. Emily's face appeared. No bright lipstick, no perfect lighting, just dark circles under her eyes and a bare, hollow apartment behind her. Her voice cracked. I spent it all. Credit cards maxed out. The Lexus got repossessed. Mom and Dad can't help anymore. Please help me. The room went silent. I looked at her, the same sister who once basked in applause as she got handed a Lexus, now trembling like a child who'd lost her toy. Part of me wanted to snap. So where's that giant red bow? Didn't it cover your debt? But another part of me softened. She was still my sister. I took a long breath. I love you, but I can't carry this for you. She blinked, like I were speaking a foreign language. I'll help you make a budget, if you're willing, but the rest is yours. It was the first time in my life that I held compassion without surrendering my boundaries. I didn't shove her off the cliff, but I didn't lie down for her to climb on either. Emily cried, not the fake sobs my mother performed in family talks. Real tears, shaky, raw. I didn't feel smug. I didn't feel guilty. I just felt light, like I had finally learned how to care without burning myself to ash. Sarah's hand rested on my shoulder. Miguel gave a small nod, the kind of friend gives when you've just scored gold in the championship of boundaries. I glanced at the tour on the shelf. This week deserves 2 coins. The party rolled on. We clinked glasses, laughed, and tore into the turkey. Sarah told a story about wading through mangrove swamps in Florida, bitten so badly by mosquitoes her team called her the mobile blood bank. Miguel bragged about new sneakers he knew would be ruined by mud the next day. The room roared with laughter, and I realized this was family. Later, I stepped onto the balcony, breathed in the cold air, and watched the lights twinkle from 100 other apartments. The whole city is like one orchestra, each home a note in a Christmas song. My phone buzzed again. A text from Emily. "Thank you for not abandoning me. I'll try it your way." I read it, smiled. Who knows if she meant it, but at least for the first time she understood I wasn't her personal bank. I went back to the table. Sarah asked, "You all right?" I nodded. "Yeah, I think this time I really am." Funny, to get here I had to walk a long circle. Leave home at 2 a.m., crash on a friend's sofa, sit through therapy, freeze my credit, face my family in a hotel library. And in the end, the reward wasn't a Lexus or a fat envelope. The reward was a simple dinner, friends around a table, and the power to say no without guilt. I raised my glass toward the glowing jar of quarters. Merry Christmas. And for the first time, the words felt like they were mine, not borrowed from some song on the radio. Strange how, after months of silence, my parents finally sent me an email. Not the usual kind that said mom was in the hospital from stress. Not the threat that dad would call the police if I didn't come home. This time, the subject line was simple. Ready to try therapy. I read it 3 times to make sure I wasn't seeing things. Turns out they knew how to use Gmail for something other than packaging guilt. Dad wrote, "If that's what it takes to repair things, we'll try. No promises, but we'll try by." Mom added a dramatic line. "Our family deserves a chance." I almost laughed. 6 months ago, I wasn't even worth a seat at the wedding. Now suddenly, I deserve a chance. I didn't jump like a kid unwrapping Christmas presents. I typed back one clean line. "The conditions are clear. When you're truly ready, I'll join." No exclamation marks. No warm emojis. I wasn't auditioning to host another family show. I'd built a fence, and if anyone wanted in, they'd have to knock the right way. Honestly, if you told me a year ago that my parents would agree to therapy, I'd have laughed and bet a month's salary it would never happen. But then again, like the Mission Creek Bridge I'm retrofitting, even old cracks can be reinforced, as long as you've got the will and the right kind of concrete. That evening, I stood on my balcony, Golden Gate glowing red in the mist. Sarah was beside me, holding a mug of hot tea. "Do you think they mean it?" she asked. I shrugged. "You don't know until the first session. Like testing a bridge. You have to hammer it to see if the concrete's hollow." Sarah laughed. "You really are a romantic." In an engineer's way. Inside, the jar of quarters gleamed under the Christmas lights. Next to it sat my crooked wooden stamp marked value in the sketch of my first bridge from college. 3 objects that would fetch nothing at a thrift store, but to me, they were monuments. A Lexus can be repossessed. Cash in an envelope can disappear. But these things remind me that worth isn't handed down. You build it yourself. I know the road ahead is long. Family therapy won't turn my mother into a saint or my father into a wise old sage after one session. But I also know this. For the first time in my life, I get to set the terms. I get to walk into that room not as the kid who always figured things out alone, but as an adult who knows his value. And friends, that's something I never had in 35 years. Have you ever seen favoritism in your family so absurd it almost felt like comedy? The kind where one kid gets a car while the other gets loose change. If you have, share it in the comments and tell me where you were watching from. I want to hear your story because trust me, no one should go through that alone. And if you believe, like I do, that silence in truth can sometimes be the most elegant revenge, hit subscribe and turn on the bell. This is where stories like mine get told, where those once labeled less important find their worth, and where favoritism eventually stares into the mirror and sees the cracks it created. None of us has to feel alone when we finally stand up, because real value never comes from an empty envelope.